I hope everyone's doing well, and I hope that this uh, presentation about the writing process and about the differences between revising and editing proves useful as you're starting the composition class and looking at the work you're going to be turning in throughout the course of the semester. We're going to talk about the tools radar versus cups, but we're going to begin by discussing just what it is to go through the writing process. The writing process, I think, is always what ought to be versus the real world. What ought to be is that a writer plans, a writer drafts, a writer revises, and a writer edits. What I think happens for most students is there's this moment of fear that the deadline's approaching, something is written, spell check is used, and then it's turned in. And planning, drafting, revising, and editing, unless one counts the use of spell check as a editing effort, don't really happen. And I even have a bit of science. If I recall correctly, I came across this in a couple of business communication books, but ideally, 20% of your time should be spent planning, 30% should be spent drafting, 50% should be spent revising and editing. I have a chart so we know it's science. The orange gives you writing time time that's spent avoiding writing. The blue or purple, or blurple if you prefer, is all about the panicking because you're going to miss the deadline. The red is about putting the words on the document, and the green is using spell check. In short, about 97% of the time, people actually use the writing process. They're avoiding writing. They're panicking and they're avoiding. And 3% of the writing process is putting words on paper. I don't have a lot of advice for the 20% planning, 30% drafting stage. My biggest piece of advice for that 50% is get a lot of words on paper. Think about what the prompt is. Think about how best to answer that prompt. Perhaps begin with, after reading my paper, the reader should know XYZ, or believe XYZ, or discover XYZ, whatever it is. But for that 50%, your worst enemy is plain and simply the blank screen or the blank piece of paper sitting in front of you. Get words on it that are somehow tangentially related to the assignment and then try to bring them in. For the 50% revising and editing, I think the radar and cups method that are mentioned on the title slide are very, very useful, and that's where most of this presentation is going to be spent. Before I get into the specifics, please remember that revision is the big picture items. Completeness. Have I told everything that needs to be told? Coherence. Is it a full story? Does it make, is it a full, complete story? Does it actually make sense? And unity, is there one thing being done here? Or is it all over the place? Editing are all the grammatical and mechanical errors, the things that are easy for me to mark, and I'll mark some of them, but Google Docs have blue lines and red lines underneath a lot of the potential spelling errors, the punctuation errors, the run on sentences, things like that. So, a lot of that, if you're using Google Docs, should be done for you. There are some things that won't catch, so you still should, do some editing. But revising is the big picture item, and it should get done before you do the editing, before you do the small grammatical and mechanical mistakes. Revise, as I said, from large to small. Overall meaning and structure, paragraph development, sentence and words. In other words, the editing part comes last, the big revisions come first. I first saw this chart on Twitter, and I had a search to find out where it originally came from. I hope I have this right, but it breaks down revising versus editing, and it gives us a couple of acronyms, RADAR and CUPS. Replace, add, delete, and reorder. Capitalization, usage, punctuation, spelling. Revise, one more time. Replace. Words that are not specific. Concrete. You've heard me say dozens, if not hundreds of times already this semester, concrete. Words that are overused. If you're stuck with, is this word overused, you can go Control F, type in the word, and find out how many times it's in the paper. And sentences that are unclear. Add new information. I've told you, does the reader have enough detail? Does the reader have enough information? If the reader needs it, add it. I'm going to toss in that you should not emphasize the descriptive adjectives and adverbs. I'm going to toss in that you should add concrete nouns and action verbs. It talks about rhetorical devices, and I would add transitional devices, things that keep the paper flowing, things that keep the reader interested. Delete unrelated ideas, ideas that are not related to each other within the paper, ideas that are not related to each other or related to the prompt, excuse me. Obviously, delete repetition. Delete unnecessary details. We talked about Bob Ross's little trees, where those happy little trees perhaps obscure the mountain. Keep the focus on the big picture. Repeated words and phrases, and sentences that sound good but don't fit. Both the related ideas and the sentences that sound good but don't fit, I think, are important. Don't get tied to anything except answering the questions posed by the prompt, telling the story, telling the narrative requested by the prompt. And finally, reorder. Do the ideas go from A to B to C effectively? Do we have something going on here so that everything's connected to the main idea? Do I have to move something from the last paragraph up to the beginning? When I read that last paragraph, have I covered everything that's in that paragraph? If not, do I need to go back up and add, or do I need to delete the sentence? Either one is fine. The last one, avoid bed-to-bed writing. And by bed-to-bed, we're talking about getting out of bed in the morning and going to bed in the evening. Not every detail matters. What's the crux of everything? And stick to that. Replace, add, delete, and reorder. I've talked about all of this, but I think the screen here is important so that you can take a quick look, the vague background information, the definitions with details, or definitions that'll provide more clarity. Replace those with things that, are clear. Add warrants to link supporting points to the claim being made. In the narrative, that's a little less important, but in all the other ones, you've got a claim, you've got some data. How is the data related to that claim? Delete points that contradict or alter the essay's thesis, and delete points that don't help the story flow. And reorder. Details that fit within the organization plan the essay uses. For this narrative essay, you're more than likely going to be going in chronological order. So if it's jumping around from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., back to 1:15 to 2:30 to 1:59, change it. The paragraphs, again, if it's vague, replace it with specifics. Are there transitions from paragraph to paragraph, from big idea to big idea? If you've got a topic sentence in the paragraph, or if you're describing the biker bar where you're waiting out the tornado, are all of the details about that biker bar in one spot and then the details of the threatening sky grouped together in the other one? And again, the narrative doesn't necessarily have a thesis, but we've talked with all three examples about how Green had a huge, big idea he wanted to cover. Do the paragraphs all link back to that big idea? And the sentences, if it's redundant, change it. Add sentences of various length and type. Simple, compound, complex, compound, complex. Delete any unnecessary prepositional phrases, and all the whiches and that's can usually go away. And reorder the words within the sentence to provide variety, to emphasize the main thought. Action verbs, concrete nouns. And at the word level, replace abstract words with concrete. And again, concrete nouns, action verbs. Delete unnecessary adjectives and adverbs. And reorder the sentences so that everything's active. Collis made a slide presentation, not the slide presentation was made by Collis. And the last part here, the capitalization, first letter of every sentence, the case of titles, the first words usually of each title, unless it's a preposition or an article. First person pronoun I, all proper nouns. Make sure you've got subject-verb agreements. Make sure your tense is specific. If this all happened in the past, keep it in the past. All the homonyms, the theirs, the itses. Make sure the words mean what you think they mean. Punctuation, use all the periods. Don't have a question mark where there's supposed to be a period or a period where there's supposed to be a question mark. Use the spell check tools. Use the Grammarly. That's, I think, all acceptable. What's not acceptable is stealing other people's ideas without trying to give them any sort of credit for it. I hope I gave proper credit for where I got this radar versus cups. Anyway, I hope this wraps it up. Use the writing process. Spend a little time getting some words down on paper. Then spend some time looking at the big picture of what the point is you want to get and are you getting there, and then get to the sentence level with the capitalization usage, punctuation, and spelling. I hope this has been somewhat useful. Hope to see you all in class and in the writing workshops. And again, I hope everybody has a great day.